Okay. You ready? Call to order the September 4th, 2019 Planning and Zoning Commission. Roll call.
Barbie,
Here.
Buckley, Castro,
Here.
Klein,
Here.
Maxwell,
Here.
Wright, Chair Doe.
Here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Nope, your
Hello?
microphone's not on.
Test? Jeff, can we get this? Test?
There we go.
There.
Got it? Okay.
Yeah.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Next is the approval of the agenda. Any additions, deletions, or corrections? And if none, I'll take a motion.
So moved.
So moved by Barbie,
Second.
second by Klein. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We do not have the August 7th minutes, so we will do those at our next meeting. This is, next up is our public participation portion of our meeting where the public has the opportunity to speak to anything not on the agenda. Make a note that we do not have anyone from the public present, so we will move on to new business. Dan, do I need to state the first one? Anything?
Yeah, I'll just mention
Okay.
the first continued hearing for 100 West Lincoln Highway, petition by Mobility for cell antenna on top of the Walgreens. They have withdrawn that petition. They have a discussion with Walgreens regarding a change in the location of the antenna and could not come up with a direction at this time, so they chose to withdraw it, and they may reapply in the future. They'd have to come back and start over, publish another notice, and kind of start over in the process. So, but they did have withdrawn this particular petition.
Thank you. So number 2 on our docket is a public hearing, a petition by Coral Din LLC, represented by Marvin Keys, requesting an amendment to the annexation agreement, an amendment represented by ordinances 2016-007 and 2016-039 to remove the maximum square footage allowed for professional service offices, in quotes, in the ordinances, and to add armed services recruiting stations, in quotes, to the list of uses allowed under professional service offices for 2061, 2112, 2115, and 2121 Sycamore Road. And I open to the petitioners. And if you could state your name and address, please, we'd appreciate it.
So my name is Marvin Keys. Address is 6801 Spring Creek Road, Rockford, Illinois, 61114. I'm here on behalf of Corral Dine. My name is Marvin Keys, as I said. We are petitioning to remove the restriction that was placed on the permitted square footage within the buildings that we've constructed at the old Doc Nelson site. The addresses are 2061, 2112, 2115, and 2121 Sycamore Road. You can see the property up here on the screen. There was a restriction that was placed on there for the maximum amount of office type uses that were going to be permitted. It was originally to allow us to put the Aspen Dental in the one building, and then the second building, the city had asked us to keep it for retail uses. We attempted to do that, and then we came in and requested an increase in the square footage that would be permitted to allow us to put in the ATI physical therapy. And at that time, I was here in front of this board and then the city council with regard to that petition, and explained at that time I would probably be back in front of you again, because with the changing nature of the retail landscape, is there's just not a lot of retailers that exist anymore. Most of these strip centers are now turning towards primarily service uses, some with a retail component, whether that's an eye care center where they also sell eyeglasses, but things like the physical therapy that went in there, hair cutting places, those kinds of things, because with the, I call it the Amazonification of our industry, it's something that we're seeing not in DeKalb, but across the board. We have 100+ properties across the Midwest, and in every location that we have, there's a very small number of true traditional retailers looking to occupy spaces. The current layout of the second building that we have is there's the ATI Physical Therapy, as you can see on the screen. We have a proposal from the Armed Services. It's an Armed Services recruiting station. Basically, the Army wants to put in a recruiting station at that location. And then we'd still have an additional 2,100 square feet of space that would still be available for whatever uses. But we're asking to completely remove the restriction on the maximum amount of professional service offices, because I do, just knowing what we've had activity for and the people who've approached us about that center over the last 3.5 years as we've been marketing it to retailers, the interest is primarily and almost exclusively non-retail uses, professional service offices, and those types of users. That's not to say we're not still marketing it to retailers. We want to get tenants in the building. We don't want to have a vacant building. And at this point, we've had 3.5 years, and the majority of that is still sitting vacant. And we'd like to see somebody in there. We'd like it to be a successful building. I'd rather have a building occupied and functioning along that corridor rather than a 75% vacant building. And so that's kind of the genesis of the request, to just remove that restriction, because I have a feeling if we only just allowed the Armed Services recruiting station, we'd probably be in front of you. Maybe it's another 1,000 square feet for another for a haircutting place or something along those lines before too long. And I think when we originally negotiated this, and it even started well before 2016 when we first started the building. It was several years before that. In the last 5 years, that retail landscape has just changed that dramatically, that it's simply not feasible to expect us to fill it. We love retailers. They pay better rent than the professional service offices do, almost across the board. So it's certainly something we're still trying to get in there, and we appreciate the city's desire to have that retail tax base. But we'd ask that you approve the elimination of the restriction and then simply add Armed Services recruiting. It may be included in professional service offices, but we wanted to, in discussions with staff, just include it just to make sure that there was no question whether or not an Armed Services recruiting station would qualify for that type of that use. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I appreciate your time.
Okay. We'll have the city do the report, and then we'll open the public hearing and ask questions if we have any. Thank you. So I open to the city.
Thank you, Chair. You have a staff report in your packet. The applicant went over summarize the request very well. Not much to really add. Again, in 2016, when this was originally annexed and zoned, there was a restriction of no more than 33% could be for professional service offices. And that was to accommodate the Aspen Dental. And then later that year, a few months, the council amended the agreement again on the request of ATI moving into the second building. And then the percentage was up to 53% max coverage for professional service offices. At that time, too, the city did ask that the applicant make some improvements in another property they own at 1700 Sycamore Road, at Dresser and Sycamore Road, and they did do some installing new parking areas or restriping those, putting in some new lighting, some new landscaping, in exchange for that amendment. So they did do that work over there to make that center look a little better. So they have, coming up to this request, they have just over 5,400 square feet available. As mentioned, the Armed Services Recruiting Station would like to locate in the middle tenant space next to ATI, in about a 2,900 square foot tenant space. As the applicant mentioned, they've been trying to market this to retailers with no success. So the staff is recommending approval of this to just remove the maximum at all so they don't have to come back. As you can see, this site does connect to the area to the north, across access, which includes several retailers, Elwood Steak and Fish House, Advance AutoZone, other retailers over there too. So it will be a benefit to both entities in terms of additional foot traffic, additional traffic in that area to help out the center. And as mentioned by the applicant, the history and the background of the retail at this time with more of the mail order items going on and some of the retailers, that's really changed. So we're in support of this amendment to the agreement to remove the max square footage for professional service offices and also add the armed services recruiting station as a listed use, so it's clear that can be allowed for that. So a sample motion is prepared in the staff report, and again, we'd recommend approval.
Thank you. So I now open up the public hearing portion of this. I note there's no public here, so I'll automatically turn to commissioners for any questions. Ms. Barbie?
I don't really have any questions.
Mr. Klein?
I'm pretty familiar with the property. I represented Dr. Nelson many years ago, and it's certainly an improvement over what he had. I ride my bike through there 7 days a week, and I noticed that empty space. And across the road, there's a number of empty spaces too, so I think it's important to approve this because they don't help anybody with empty spaces around. I think the recruiting station certainly wouldn't be a disadvantage there. So I favor it.
I agree. I would love to have you get someone in there, and if that's what's necessary, so be it. Again, the Armed Services Recruiting Station is a great start. Hopefully you can find somebody else to fill the other tenant spot. I know you can't be as selective, if at all, with retail these days, so I agree.
My turn.
Mr. Castro?
Just two quick comments. I think, as Mr. Keys just pointed out, the retail landscape in this country has changed dramatically. We're not the exception, and this is part of the motivation why we are having this discussion. Of course, it's not a matter of looking to the past, but to the future. I think it's worth it's worth that we remember the motivation of the city for this. I think it had to do with tax revenue and retail versus services, so on and so forth. And I guess it's worth us remembering that for the future in case this comes our way. I think our little city of DeKalb is not the exception in trying to look for a different revenue model, to account for the differences in retail in this country. The only other comment that I have is trying to cross our T's and dotting our I's. I don't have a problem with adding armed services recruiting stations. I want to make sure, Mr. Olson, that this is not explicitly excluded from what the zoning currently is. I prefer that we have the discussion, the sooner the better. You understand? So I'm looking at the sample motion, and part of the petition is to add armed services recruiting stations, and the question I have is whether the current zoning excludes it or not. Just to avoid.
It doesn't exclude it. It lists professional service offices, and then it lists some examples like a medical offices, accountant, and it wasn't quite clear if armed services recruiting station was in that. And of course, allows all the retail uses, or any restaurant is still in there. It doesn't change that.
So a motion that includes this specific addition wouldn't be encountering an explicit,
No.
moment where it says it's excluded. Okay, thank you very much.
So I have a question for you also, Dan. In that professional service offices, and I'm sorry, I will admit that I did not do my due diligence and look up to see what that list is. So Mr. Keys had mentioned about, hair cutting salons. Is that listed in there? And is there a reason maybe why we shouldn't expand a little bit more on what possibly could go in there?
That's a good idea.
The language, that's a good point. The language does list licensed doctor, chiropractors, urgent care, dental offices, legal, accountant, other professional service-based uses. And if there's needs to be a determination, that's determined by the city manager. So
Okay.
it's a good point if, there's other service uses, beauty salons, et cetera, nail salons.
And I don't know if we need to be that explicit, but now's our opportunity, I guess, to consider that.
Yeah, you're certainly fine to expand that motion to include other, I'm sure the applicant want, if you want to make it any other service uses, just expand it more.
So, Mr. Keys, do you have any other service areas that you would like us to consider?
Currently, right now, it's difficult to say for sure exactly what that would entail. Where do some of those services fall in? Do they fall into the retail type tenants that are already permitted versus the professional service offices that were specifically limited in the ordinance? I don't know that we need to go into that. Because I think that the current structure of that ordinance allows us to do some of those things. And in speaking with staff and talking to Bill Nicholas, I'm not concerned that there's an intent to try to put us into a little box. It was that this had some specific restrictions for this particular type of use that we knew we had some conflict there. So
Maybe we could there is in the UDO, there's in the list of permitted uses in the light commercial, general commercial district, there's a service facilities use, and then it lists several examples: barber shops, beauty shops, half a dozen or 10, examples of that.
Okay.
So you could reference that service facilities use as stated in the UDO, and that would include all these uses, which would include these examples you brought up.
I think that would
Chair.
be acceptable and probably helpful in the long run.
And part of my thought on that was if we're if we're considering removing the maximum square footage allowed for those, that then opens up that third space, correct?
Right.
For them to use that type of use in there. And if we needed to be a little more, explicit on what we may want to also consider including, then you wouldn't necessarily have to come back, correct?
Well,
Right.
to
And-
that point, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. And then, the ordinance isn't just covering your property, it's covering, everybody in the city. And so if we've got those areas that are looking at the other vacant spots in town that might, maybe they're holding back on coming and asking for that, this may open up some possibilities in other areas.
So if you want to go that route, I think just adding to the motion in service facilities as stated in the UDO, add that to the list of uses would cover all these ones that have been brought up.
To that end, are there specific types of businesses that have approached you or that are, I guess, a substitute for the retail space that you wanted to fill?
I can tell that we've had, and over time, there are many that come and we talk to them and try to see whether there's a real deal there, and they kind of go away. But in the last 6 months, I can say that we've had some discussions with a hair salon, like a hair cuttery type place, Great Clips, Hair Cuttery, Sports Clips, those guys. And then actually a cell phone store that I believe they also wanted to put up an 80-foot antenna or something, and we told them we weren't interested in seeing an 80-foot antenna on our site. But those have been the only other kind of leads, I guess, or the more active leads, other than just simple initial inquiries. But that's.
I was just looking for
Yeah.
suggestions, since you're the one that's filling the space.
Yeah.
I thought that there might be some way to broaden that language if there are people that are approaching you. Obviously, you're on the other side of the fence, so.
Yeah, I think if you added the just general service uses as has been described by Mr. Olson, I think that would broaden the scope to include probably the most likely users. There's always a chance somebody comes and doesn't fall within that, but I think that covers the vast majority of it.
Okay.
Thank you. I will say I'm a little hesitant in reading through all this. I've been going back and forth and weighing in my mind. We did approve this property to have some retail space, and I think it's wise for us to think about expanding those service areas with some hesitation that I'd really like to see a retail component in there too, obviously to help, with some of the tax revenue for the city. So I want to make that point clear that I'm not like totally thinking this should be a service type building, but I just wanted to state that, so thank you. So there is no one yet present from the public, so I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and ask for any further comments or questions. No? I'd be happy to take a motion.
I can move, it's the last time, but what do I say? How do we change it?
If you want to add these service facilities, I think the motion as is, and then after armed services recruiting stations, this add and service facilities as stated in the UDO.
Okay, so
And
I
there's a term in there that lists all these.
as
And
service
Other service
and
areas.
other service areas as stated in the UDO.
and service facilities as stated in the UDO. Okay.
There's no problem expanding this without them coming back on another petition or anything?
No,
Okay.
yeah.
So I make a motion, my last motion. Based upon the submitted petition and testimony presented, I move that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend to the City Council approval of an amendment to the annexation agreement and amendment represented by Ordinance 2016-007 and 2016-039 to remove the maximum square footage allowed for professional service offices in the ordinances and to add armed services recruiting stations and other service facilities as listed in the UDO to the list of uses allowed under professional service offices for the property located at 2061, 2112, and 2115 and 2121 Sycamore Road.
A
Second.
Motion's been made by Barbie, second by Castro. Roll call.
Barbie,
Yes.
Buckley, Castro,
Yes.
Klein,
Yes.
Maxwell,
Yes.
Wright, Chair Doe.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Reports.
Next scheduled commission meeting is September 18th. No hearings are scheduled yet, so unless we have some else comes in, a plan or something, we'll cancel that, and notice would go out next week. Past council meeting, or the upcoming council meeting on the 9th, we'll have the second reading for the Agora Tower or Mooney property, the mixed-use project the commission recently recommended approval on. That did approve on first reading at the last meeting in August. You have the updated zoning and development sheet in front of you as of August 27th. So if there's any questions on that, let me know. Of course, Katerina's last meeting tonight, so I just want to say thank you, Katerina, on your service and your support of the commission, and really appreciate it from the city's, all the staff. Do appreciate your service.
Thank you.
I want to equally say those sentiments, and I'm going to miss you as you've contributed greatly to this commission, and it's been a lot of fun having you on here and getting to know you a little bit better. So thank you for your service. Good luck in your future, and I know you have some upcoming fun coming up. So
Thank you.
Is anybody else have anything else to report? If not, I'll take an adjournment. Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
So moved by Barbie,
Second.